an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Ruin and Rising, chapters 17, 18, and epilogue, or after, as she calls it. In these chapters, so the ending, when you come down to it, did go the way I thought in terms of the finish line. But I am happy to say that the way we get there was a little bit more interesting than I expected, and overall, I feel much better this episode than I did in the last one. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you again to Joanna for commissioning this episode. Hi, Joanna, if you're out there. So, yeah, I was just like, you guys know, last episode, I was just so fed up and frustrated. And I am really very pleased, actually, at the way things wound up. Because it didn't feel I knew she would wind up with Mal. I knew that probably killing the Darkling was going to wind up undoing the stuff that he had done, and it would all be better again. I figured. However, the one thing that I still couldn't understand was how they were going to deal with Mal as the amplifier. I'll be honest, I am still not entirely sure how that happened. And I will read that section once I get to it out loud and see if I can parse it with all of you. Excuse me. But I thought that just like taking the life of the creature was not enough to create the effect of the amplifier. I thought that it was like a combination of taking the life of the creature and fabricating a sort of token from them. And it appears that just killing Mal is all it took for whatever was going to happen. And I don't really understand how that works. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. It like, even if there isn't a total explanation, I'm actually okay with that, because sometimes it's okay for something to be sort of an impression. The magic of this universe does feel sort of fluid enough that you don't need to absolutely explain, versus something like Mistborn, which I'm covering for patrons right now, where there's a very specific magical system, and if something were to happen that feels like it doesn't fit in the rules that we know, it really matters. It will almost always turn out to mean that magic has more rules, or fewer rules, I guess, depending, than we knew, and fewer rules than even the characters knew, because sometimes the characters, as it turns out, are not as well informed about magic within their own universe as they thought they were. So like I said, if it turns out that there isn't like an absolute explanation, I don't mind as much, but I am curious if there is something that I missed that other people picked up on, or if there is a theory out there that would explain it a little bit more clearly, because it was just, I felt sort of confused in the midst of it, and I don't entirely understand what happens to Alina. So, chapter 17, it's the morning after, and she wakes up, and Mal has already gotten up, but he left her a pot of tea on a tray surrounded by apple blossoms. I have to confess that if a man was gone when I woke up, but he left me a pot of tea, I would marry him immediately. That is 100% the way to my heart. Please and thank you. You know, if you leave, just leave. That's bad manners. But if you leave and you make sure that I wake up with the caffeine that I need, I am just, it's thoughtful. I appreciate it, everything about it. So she sits at the desk again, and reminder, she is still in this like sort of conservatory that has the apple trees that are blooming at the time, whereas outside of the conservatory, the apple trees are loaded with fruit. So being in the conservatory has sort of slowed everything down, clearly. And I kind of like that as a bit of symbolism, you know, that it's like a bit of a moment away from the world for the two of them. Time slowing down, you know. So she sits at the desk and she leaves their names in the journal. And she thinks, I wasn't sure why I did it. I just needed to say we had been there. Which I understand, especially considering that they're going into this battle with the understanding that at least one of them is going to die, if not both of them. That's really the assumption. Like, they can hope that they both make it out, but both of them assume at least one of them isn't coming out of this. So she goes and she is bid goodbye by Genya, and they all like pack their stuff up and head out. And when I had said that I didn't really understand the plan last time, I'll be honest, when they were talking about being on, like attacking the skiff, I had completely forgotten that the skiff would be on the unsea in the fold. So once I began to understand how that was working, I was like, oh, okay, no wonder I wasn't really following, because I like had the whole location pictured wrong in my head. For some reason, I was thinking that this was going to be in the air, like it was going to be one of those sort of air, those like, I can't remember what they kept calling them when Nikolai had them. But yeah, I just had the wrong whole like mental idea. And thus making them be invisible in that space is like even more effective because it's already so dark. And this is part of the thing with the like what does she call it? A sound blanket, I think, sonic blanket. Which makes it a lot easier for them to communicate with each other despite the chaos of what's going on out there. And it's all actually, it turns out to be like a really cool idea. I just did not grasp what they meant, you know, initially. So, they walk into the fold and they walk like about 2 miles in, I think. And this is a weird moment, so I'm just going to read this. My thoughts turned to him. Cautiously, I tested the tether that bound us. Hunger quaked through me with palpable force. He was eager, ready to unleash the power of the fold, ready for a fight. I felt it too. I let it echo back to him, that rush of anticipation, that need. I am coming for you. I was a little bit surprised by this because I thought that the whole point was to completely like catch them by surprise. And her saying, like, letting him know that she's coming for him, I didn't expect her to be so open about it. But really, when it comes down to it, like, he had to know that she was going to try and ambush him. So it doesn't really matter, probably. But I confess, a little taken aback at how willing she is to let him sense her. So, at this point, the Darkling is heading towards them at basically full speed. And as it's like coming closer into view, it begins to slow down. Squalor stood the mass in their blue kefta. A few Inferni lined the railings, flanked by heartrenders in red, heavily armed in Oprichniki in gray. It was a spare force. The students must be below decks. And I was just like, oh, girl, like, no. As it turns out, he had not killed the students, but I stand by my frustration at her, like, not understanding the depths to which he will sink. Because the way, and I'm going to just say that for me, this was the main thing that genuinely did not work. And I'm extremely curious as to how everybody else sees this. But there's a continuing sort of theme about how the Darkling just like was misunderstood or misguided and genuinely loved Ravka, but Ravka didn't love him, is what she says later. And, you know, he says something to her like, I knew that you would think that I actually killed so many of these kids or was willing to kill them because you needed to make me into a villain. But you should have known that after losing so many Grisha children, I would never do that. And it's like played as if we're supposed to think, oh, he's actually not as bad as we thought. But it's not effective because the way that he says that makes it sound like these children are a resource for him. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, how you thought that I was capable of killing children. Of course I would never. And it's much more like, how could you think that I would shoot ourselves in the foot like that? And that's a very different energy. And I just didn't really see it as like proof of him being a better person than he was pretending to be. This is something that I think Brando Sando also runs into, to bring up Mistborn again, where we are sort of told by the author that a person is better than they act like they are, and yet we aren't presented with compelling evidence to prove that they are better. It's just meant to be understood that this is an act. And it doesn't work because it feels real. Your actions are who you are. And, okay, so he took the kids hostage and didn't kill them or wasn't intending to kill them. That was still a bunch of innocent people hanging in a tree. You know, that scene still happened. And I just found it really bizarre that, like, the line in the sand is evidently killing children, and that would have made him a monster. But shy of that, he's just really misunderstood. I don't get it. I don't really feel like it makes sense. And it does seem like we're meant to think the same thing that Alina thinks. And I don't feel that way at all. So anyway, this fight begins, and her keeping everybody invisible is actually working pretty well initially. Even at one point, Nikolai jumps in, and he begins to attack on their behalf and save people. And I was just like, all right, like, you know, getting up in there, doing something. Like, he's able to sort of satisfy his bloodlust in a way, I think, because he goes after Oprichniki, which, I mean, you know, it's not great, but what can you do? They're on the wrong side, so I guess there it is. So as this is going, she gets on board, and they're looking for the students, which I just knew were definitely not here. And it was like wild to me that after not being able to spot any of them, she just assumes that they're below decks. And I was just like, oh my God, you are such a chump. Of course they're not here. But regardless, she winds up getting shot. And it causes a shake in her concentration, which eventually leads to people being visible. And it's like sporadic initially. They're visible for a second, and then she like gets it back together again, and then it begins to fade again. And the Darkling, is standing over her with his foot like on her injured shoulder. And let's see, what did you do to them? They're safe and sound back in Kribirsk, probably having their lunch. I knew the threat would be enough. Did you really believe I would endanger Grisha children when we've lost so many? I'd thought he was capable of anything. He wanted me to believe, I realized. When he'd shown me Botkin and Anya Kuya's corpses, he wanted me to believe in his ruthlessness. Then I remembered his words from so long ago. Make me your villain. I know what you thought, what you've always thought of me. It's so much easier that way, isn't it? To puff yourself up with your own righteousness. I didn't invent your crimes. And she's not wrong. But it's like sort of sidestep. She says that, and then the conversation continues on to him asking where Mal is. He doesn't try and defend himself in an effective way here. And she doesn't actually like get to the point. You know, it just, I don't know. It was weird to me that I was meant to sort of be understanding in any way of his position here. So he has an idea of the fact that she is going to try and explode herself, and finds the blasting powder on her and takes it off of her. And eventually she does this thing that I was like, oh, this is so smart. And I wish that she had used this a few more times. Restrained by the Nichivoya, I couldn't use the cut, but I wasn't powerless. I twisted my wrists. The violet light of the Lumia bent around me. At the same time, I reached across the tether between us. The Darkling's head jerked up, and for a moment, though I still stood invisible in the grip of the Nichivoya, I was staring at him from beside the mast. The vision of the girl before him was whole and unwounded. She raised her arms to deliver the cut. The Darkling didn't stop to think. He reacted. It was the barest second, the brief space between instinct and understanding, but it was enough. His shadow soldiers released me and sprang forward to protect him. I lunged toward the railing and threw myself over the side of the skiff. I landed on my wounded arm, and pain slammed through my body. The Darkling's howl of rage sounded behind me. I knew I'd lost control of the light, and that meant I was visible. I made myself keep moving. So, yeah, I was really... The idea of being able to make a double of yourself... Correct me if I'm wrong. Have we seen that from her before? I feel like this is pretty new. This would have been very useful, but I'm genuinely not sure if it's brand new or not. So, let's see. Mal's voice was, she says to herself, Mal will always find me. And he basically is like, things are really bad. You know that this is over. You have to do it. Don't let it all be for nothing. Save them, Alina. Don't let me live knowing I might have stopped this. Save them. This once, let me carry you. End this. So, she does. She stabs him in the heart. And I was genuinely surprised. I was like not thinking that she would do it. So he goes down. I knew when he was gone. For a moment, all was silent, a held breath, and then everything exploded into white fire. A roar filled my ears, an avalanche of sound that shook the sands and made the very air vibrate. I screamed as power flooded through me, as I burned, consumed from the inside. I was a living star. I was combustion. I was a new sun, born to shatter air and eat the earth. The world trembled, dissolved, and crashed in on itself, and then the power was gone. My eyes flew open. Thick darkness surrounded me. My ears were ringing. And she tries to call light, and nothing happens. And she's like thinking at first that this was some sort of like weird lesson about greed, and that none of them really understood what the like third amplifier did, and that this was a kind of punishment for pursuing the sort of power that nobody should really have. And honestly, that's kind of a dope concept. Like, if that had been what it was, I wouldn't have been mad about it. So Tolia and Tamar come forward, and she is begging them to bring Mal back to her. And it feels even crueler, of course, because she killed Mal, assuming that it would give her the power to fix this thing. And now he's dead, and it seems like she can't even do what she was able to do before. And I held up my hands, pleading with the light and with any saint who had ever lived. It was no good. The gesture felt false. It was a pantomime. There was nothing there. I really loved that description of it. it's one thing to say, like, I waved my hand and nothing happened. But saying it felt false and it was a pantomime has a whole different energy to it. You know, it just feels a lot more like I could feel in my gut nothing was going to happen. It wasn't just that nothing happened. It was the whole, the sort of atmosphere inside of me has changed. Does that make sense? So Bagra had warned me, you may not be able to survive the sacrifice that Merzost requires. But what was the point of this sacrifice? Had we lived only to be a lesson? Was that the truth? Some kind of cruel equation that took all our love and loss and added them up to nothing? It was too much. Then I saw it, a light in the distance, a gleaming blade that pierced the dark. Before I could make sense of it, another appeared. A bright point that became two broad beams sweeping high and wild above me. A torrent of light burst from the darkness just a few feet from me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw Vladim, his mouth open in shock and confusion as light poured from his palms. I turned my head and saw them sparking to life, one by one across the fold, like stars appearing in a twilight sky. Soldat, Sol, and Oprichniki, their weapons forgotten, their faces baffled, awed, terrified, and bathed in light. And I saw what he had done, and she's talking about Morozova. This was the gift of the 3 amplifiers. Power multiplied 1,000 times, but not in one person. How many new summoners had just been created? How far had Morozova's power reached? So my question here, everybody, is why it is that it took the power away from her. Why isn't it that it just distributed it instead of it robbing her of power completely? Is that meant to be the price you pay? Like, is that supposed to be sort of... Because nobody knew that was the price you paid. So it's not as if she voluntarily decided to sacrifice herself, although she was going to do that. But it's not just that, like, her power is gone. She's truly not Grisha anymore. Because when a Grisha does not use their abilities, they lose health and vitality. And clearly that never wound up happening to her. So I don't know. I didn't really understand the meaning of it. And I'm fine with it. It's interesting. And, like, clearly she wasn't enjoying being Sun Summoner. She didn't want this anymore. She had never really wanted this. But it is weird to me. Like, if other people had been able to find these amplifiers, would it have worked the exact same way for all of them as well? Or is it because Alina has a power that nobody else seemed to have? So the Darkling at this point, like, he stumbles on her and just can't understand what he's looking at. And he realizes that Mal must have been the amplifier. He's looking down at Mal and begins to sort of, like, put it together. And I lurched to my feet and the Darkling strode toward me. His hands went to my throat. "No," he whispered. Only then did I realize the collar had fallen away. I looked down. It lay in pieces beside Mal's body. My wrist was bare. The fetter had broken too. "This isn't right," he said, and in his voice I heard desperation, a new and unfamiliar anguish. His fingers skimmed my neck, cupped my face. I felt no surge of surety. No light stirred within me to answer his call. His gray eyes searched mine, confused, nearly frightened. "You were meant to be like me. You're nothing now." And he really, like, loses it here. And he begins to scream and calls all the Nichevoya, and in this moment is completely distracted. And she takes advantage and stabs him in the heart. And again, Mercy. Had I ever really understood it? Had I actually believed I knew what it was to suffer, to forgive? Mercy, I thought, for the stag, for the darkling, for us all. Mercy? I guess? Because it's meant to be that he's so heartbroken over the fact that he's truly alone now, but I just don't buy it. I didn't feel it. And yeah, so she stabs him in the heart, and he seems to, he literally laughs and says, this. And when he goes down, he asks her to stay with him. And there's this whole moment of, him asking her to not bury him, speak my name once more. And it was just nothing. It genuinely, for me, I was just so irritated by it. I think that a lot of this is me having much less patience these days with men getting away with shitty behavior in general. And so there's so much media that I am consuming where a guy does something that in my mind is just that's unforgivable. Leave him and never look back. That dude is just a bad person. And we're just supposed to be well, he's flawed. And it's okay, yeah, people can be flawed and I don't want to fuck with them ever again. Those things are not mutually exclusive. That just because you decide to kind of go scorched earth, re your relationship to somebody, doesn't mean that that's an unjust reaction. So I think that's really what's playing into this for me a lot here, is just this feeling of no, there's no excuses. There's no explanation. There's nothing that makes any of this okay. The Soldat Soul were cheering, letting the light blaze around them in glorious arcs as they burned the fold away. Others had formed a line, bringing the beams of light together, sending a cascade of sunlight speeding through the thinning scraps of darkness, unraveling the fold in a rippling wave. And I actually really liked this concept, though. As much as I don't really understand why her power had to be taken from her and she was made into a regular person, like with Mal, it's meant to be that he was born with a spark of Merzost in him due to what, oh my God, I keep forgetting his name. Oh my God, you guys, help. Is anybody out there? Moritsova. Oh my God. Can't believe. But yeah, so he was born with that in him. So when she killed him, that bit of Merzost was what, that extra push that brought everything together and caused this huge, basically miracle is what she calls it. But Alina had been an actual Grisha, right? It wasn't like she was imbued with a particular spark of something the way that Mal was. Is that supposed to, because like I said, they are unique. Her and the Darkling each have powers that nobody else has ever seemed to have. So is that meant to be just, as she calls it, an aberration, an abomination? Or are there going to be others who turn up who have these abilities eventually? We know that now that she's given the sun power to people, that is going to be more widespread, I guess. Although I don't remember people talking about summoning sunlight in the other books. I may just be off on that. But I just don't really understand how it is that she can... I mean, is that all it is? Is that whichever person, whatever Grisha used these three tools, the amplifiers, they would have distributed their power amongst others, even if they didn't have an ability that was unique to them? If Genya did it, would there just suddenly be 100 other incredibly talented tailors? Okay. I mean, why not, I guess. And it makes sense that she is not disabled really by not using her power anymore if she has been transformed wholly into an ordinary girl, which, you know, is clearly what happened. Like, the Darkling knew immediately that she didn't have her power in her. He could tell. This is always something that I find kind of interesting, is the idea of being able to tell, because in this universe, people can hide the fact that they have abilities. It's not like you can just tell by looking at somebody. But with the Darkling, he was able to tell with Alina specifically, and I have to assume that's because they had complementary abilities, and there was just like that kind of bond between them. So the next chapter begins with the escape, basically, them departing from the fold, because things begin to sort of, now that there are other people with these powers, progress fairly quickly, with the fold depleting, sort of disintegrating. It gets scored into scraps and vanishes. I really do enjoy the mention that there's scraps of darkness that sort of float over the sand and remain to be discarded eventually, or attacked by sunlight to be burnt up. And I was a little bit bummed because evidently the people begin to hunt the Volcra. And I don't know why, but the fact that Nikolai is the only Volcra that turned back to a person feels like a bit of a cheat to me. I don't really understand why he turned back and others didn't. Either, is it supposed to be that he was a particular type of Volcra that the others weren't? Because as far as I knew, yeah, he was turned by the Darkling, but so were all the others, weren't they? So why didn't it work? I just don't really, that was the one thing that I was like, we just wanted to save Nikolai. And look, I'm not mad at that. Just for the record, I really like Nikolai, and as it turns out, he's the King of Scars, which is who the next book is about. And y'all know that he's been my favorite character in this series. So the fact that the next book is about him, I'm 100% fine with it. I don't want him to die. But, okay, so Denise says he wasn't a real Volcra, he was half and half. Okay, I thought that he was just, somehow able to fight it more. I didn't realize that he was genuinely not totally transformed. He was attacked with the darkness like Genya was. Yeah, but I thought I just assumed that was the way that the Darkling had turned everybody, was attacking them with darkness. I mean, that's his whole thing. So I figured that was just how he did it. I didn't realize that was a special transformational technique that other people hadn't experienced. But yeah, this is when Alina says to Tolia, I need you to understand that I died here today. And I realized what it was that she was going to do. And I was like, oh, that's really smart. Because the whole thing has been that, 1, she doesn't want to be in this position. 2, she doesn't really want to marry Nikolai. She wants to be with Mal. And 3, everything about her life has felt like it wasn't up to her. Everything has been sort of decided by her ability and the circumstances surrounding the position of her country. And it was never due to what she wanted and what she was choosing for herself. So the fact that she gets to basically fake her death and then go on to live a normal life is a really nice way to end that. I thought it wasn't something that had really occurred to me as being an option, but it makes a lot of sense. And as we see later, Genya has tailored Ruby to look like Alina so that she can be burned on the pyre and everybody sees her body and believes that she's dead. So, because I thought it was just going to be oh, we'll circulate a story that you died out there. And I was like, too many people believe in Alina as a saint to buy it that she's dead unless they see a body. It didn't occur to me. I think that I thought somebody would have to be alive in order for Genya to tailor them. It didn't occur to me that she could tailor her body, which opens up a lot of possibilities, by the way. Denise says, after the Darkling was left in the Unsea in the first book, he had the ability to attack and poison people with darkness. He didn't do that before. I believe the Volcra were turned into Volcra at the making of the Unsea. Okay, I mean, I knew that they were turned into it at the making, but I just thought that that making was utilizing the same sort of attack. Does that make sense? So yeah, I just figured, oh yeah, he's just doing it again, but on like a smaller scale with Nikolai. But okay, that's fine. And like I said, I'm not mad that Nikolai is still alive. I was genuinely like upset when he gets turned into a Volcra. So this worked for me. So they got us back to Tomikiana and stashed us in the barn, tucked away with the cider presses in case the Soul returned. And they get Nikolai all cleaned up. They get him redressed. They feed him. And they put him out there again and have him begin to take control of everything, which he does. But he has been sobered up a little bit. This experience has definitely changed him. And he still has the scars on his hands, which evidently, like, later on, it's mentioned that Alina's scar doesn't have the same black threads in it, and neither does Genya's. But his do, evidently, which I thought was interesting. Let's see. So yeah, scarred but not nearly so frightening. And she asks about Genya's eye, and she says, gone for good, but I've grown rather fond of my patch. I think it lends me a certain rakishness. It wasn't until that night that Zoya and Tamar came to check on us, bringing news from Krybiersk. It seemed the power of the amplifiers had reached all the way to the dry docks. The explosion had knocked Grisha and dock workers from their feet, and mayhem had erupted as light started to pour from every Otskazaya within range. I can never say this word. Otkazatsya. I think. Otkazatsya. I can't like consistently say it. And yeah, this is when it says some of them had picked up guns and started hunting Volcra. And I was just like, man, that's fucked up to know. Like, I completely get that they are bloodthirsty monsters, but it does feel like gross, you know, knowing that they were people and that they're just like tracking them down. It's like, oh man, what else are you going to do? You have to, but it just is not a job that I would want. Let upon your heads be it. When the rumors of the Darkling's death had reached Krybiersk, the military camp had descended into chaos, and in strode Nikolai Lantsov. Nikolai had been training for this his entire life, and I knew he had a gift for the impossible. And she asks Tamar how he is, and she says, haunted. There's a difference in him, though I'm not sure anyone else would notice. And at this time, Zoya basically is like, girl, I saw, like, that guy is fine as hell. He's a king now. He's rich as fuck. He's blindingly charismatic. How did you ever resist him? And Mal says, good question. And I'm like, oh, Zoya, are you going to wind up with Nikolai? Because I see it. The two of them together would work very well, honestly. He needs somebody who is as, in their way, superficial as him, but also as forceful in personality. Because superficial is often taken to indicate that people only care about the surface and that the rest of their, like, personhood is sort of weak, you know, and that they're only concerned with the shell, but there's no substance behind it. And that's not necessarily true. Zoya is very concerned with her image, but also there is a great deal of substance behind who she is. And I just think that they would work quite well together, actually. And he has such kindness that he would balance out her sort of, I don't want to say callousness, but yeah, I guess that's fair. He would balance out her callousness really well. Also, they would have beautiful children. So let's see. Mal was weak, and Tamar had healed the bullet wound in my shoulder. I felt good as new. At least that was what I told them. I could feel the ache of absence where my power had been, like a phantom limb. And that really I was bummed about. I was hoping that she would feel somehow like better. And she does, like, in a way, but it isn't what I had hoped for her. You know, she definitely feels the loss of it and winds up having to grieve it. And I appreciated that Mal gave her the space to do that and was like, you know, I understand that lots of other people lost a great deal, but you get to feel bad about this. It's fine. And I wondered how Toya and Tamar had brought Mal back. I'd been willing to simply call it a miracle. Now I thought I understood. Mal had possessed 2 lives, but only one was rightfully his. The other was stolen, an inheritance wrought from Merzost, snatched from the making at the heart of the world. It was the force that had animated Morozsova's daughter when her human life had gone, the power that had reverberated through Mal's bones. His blood had been thick with it, and that purloined bit of creation was what had made him such a remarkable tracker. It had bound him to every living thing. That I found to be a very satisfying explanation of why he was such a good tracker. Because, you know, all of us had to be aware that his abilities were just kind of like, it wasn't even a Grisha thing. Because if it were, he would sense that he was tapping into something. And he never did seem to have to tap into anything. It was just a constant awareness that he had. And so any living thing, he was like able to sense where it was. It sort of reminds me of in the Dresden Files, Harry winds up connecting with this island using a sort of ability / connection called intellectus, which means that at any given moment, he knows exactly what's going on that island, to the point where he can name exactly how many squirrels, exactly how many of each type of bird. He knows how tall every single tree is. It's just this complete, total understanding of every inch of life in that particular place. And Mal, it seems like, you know, I don't know if trees and plants would have necessarily like made it into his purview, or if it was just things that were like falling into the animal category. We know that he was able to do this with insects because we saw him like, I feel like he like shot a bug out of the air somewhere that they had holed up. He did something with an insect. So definitely a stretch to them. But I think that they had to be part of the animal kingdom. I could be wrong about that. He may just never have had a need to sense where a particular tree was. But yeah, I just thought that that was interesting. And it also is a nice sort of parallel to Alina in that she, having lost her power, the fact that he has also lost something makes this feel a lot more of a balanced relationship to me. Because as he says at one point, you know, I often wished that your power was gone, but I didn't want it to be like this. And I would have been really sort of bummed out if Alina had had to lose something at the end here and Mal didn't. Because not only would it feel like, oh, now that she's less than she was, all of a sudden he's okay with it. Just there is such a trend of women who are powerful being too much for men and having to like cover their abilities and be less in order to make the men around them feel more comfortable and less threatened. And I really didn't want to see that. And not only that, but I really wanted Mal to understand where she was coming from going through this. So the fact that he had an ability that he also lost made me feel like, okay, you know what? He understands in a way how she's feeling. And it's even like, there's even more of a difference in a way because she was something that's sort of quantifiable. Her having been a Grisha, she can point to and be like, yeah, I was Grisha once. And the others know that. And like, you know, in the epilogue, she gets given a kefta as a gift. And there's like a whole sort of connection there that they say she'll always be one of us. So people understand that loss. And while it's not something that has happened before, it is something that there's a specific name to. What Mal has gone through is very unknown, and lots of people wouldn't necessarily even understand it. So in some ways, what he's going through, it feels like he's even more alone than she is, because he had something that he didn't even quite know he had. Like, they did know that he was this incredible tracker, but he wasn't aware that it was something that was sort of borrowed in a way. So the fact that he is without it and Alina is also without hers, I just think that that symmetry makes for a more balanced relationship, you know? So let's see. Oh my God. Oh, this was funny. That life is over. Maybe I'll be smarter in the next one. I snorted. We'll see. We're going to have to choose new names, you know. Misha is already making a list of suggestions. Oh, saints. You have nothing to complain about. Apparently, I am to be Dmitri Dumpkin. Suits you. I should warn you that I'm keeping a tab of all of your insults so I can reward you when I'm healed. Easy with the threats, Dumpkin. Dumpkin is a pretty great name. So, let's see. Genya brought us clean clothes. She'd once woven gold through my hair at the little palace, but now a more radical change was necessary. So she turns Alina's white hair red. It does eventually go back to white, but it takes a little while. And they have them, like, they are dressed in ordinary peasant clothes, which Alina mentions it feels a little bit weird. You know, she's been in an army sort of vibe for so long. It was easy to blend in with the crowds crossing to and from Ravka. There were families, groups of soldiers, nobles, and peasants. Children climbed over the ruins of sand skiffs. People gathered in spontaneous parties. They kissed and hugged, handed out bottles of kvass and fried bread stuffed with raisins. They greeted each other with shouts of Yunjost, unity. Amid the celebrations, there were pockets of grief. Silence reigned in the crumbling remains of what had been Novosibirsk. Most of the buildings had slumped into dust. There were only dim suggestions of spaces where the streets had been, and everything had been bleached a near colorless gray. The round stone fountain that had stood at the center of the town looked like a crescent moon, eaten away wherever the fold's dark power had touched it. Old men poked at the odd ruins and muttered to each other. Even beyond the fallen town's edges, mourners laid flowers on the wrecks of skiffs and built little altars on their hulls. So, yeah, I appreciated that mention, because there's certainly, you know, going to be both. The celebratory reunions with people that you have missed, and then having to step back and establish the damage and figure out exactly how bad it is and what you've lost that you maybe didn't realize you'd lost until it came time to tally it all up. And she hears her name being bandied about. Again, people are like selling alleged finger bones. Just wild, I swear to God. So eventually they go to an inn, and she heads off to the little is it the little palace? She goes to the Darkling's pavilion. That's right. So the Darkling had taken up residence here. He'd hung black banners from the windows, and the carving of the double eagle above the door had been replaced with a sun in eclipse. Now, workmen were pulling down the black silks and replacing them with Ravkan blue and gold. An awning had been set up to catch plaster, as a soldier took a massive hammer to the stone symbol above the door, shattering it to dust. A cheer went up from the crowd. I couldn't share in their excitement. For all his crimes, the Darkling had loved Ravka, and he'd wanted its love in return. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. I highlighted this because as I was reading it, my eyes just like grew to saucers, and I could not believe that even at this point, she can't share in their excitement at the fact that this fucking terrorist is dead. And that was what he was. Make no mistake. Like, I genuinely am judging her for her reaction to this. It bugs me. I do not understand how she can have any sympathy for him at this point. There's just no excuse. I just don't get it. He had loved Ravka. No, he didn't. He just didn't. He loved himself, and he justified his shit by like trying to wrap it in this other. No, doubt it. So she goes to see Tolia and Tamar. And I really enjoy the fact that when she asks one of the guards to tell her where they are, he at first doesn't want to listen to her, and she has to get sort of snippy with him because she's used to people listening by virtue of who she is, and she doesn't have that currency anymore. But she mentions that, the old version of her would not have gotten snippy at all. And this version has no problem with it, just being like, what are you waiting for? So she goes to see Nikolai, and there's this moment where he is just sort of sitting lost in thought, and she can't help but notice that he isn't on his game the way that he had been. A lapse, covered with charm, but a lapse nonetheless. So she comes to sit with him, and she asks what he's reading. And he says, "Really, I just wanted to look at the words." Though my scars had faded, the darkling had marked Nikolai in a different way. Faint lines still ran along each of his fingers where claws had shoved their way through his skin. He would have to pass them off as signs of the torture he'd endured as the darkling's prisoner. I think I misread this, because I thought when she said, oh no, she does say black lines. Faint black lines. Okay. I thought that it was just lines and that I was misreading. But yeah, he does have some black still on his skin, which is interesting that he has it and her and Genya don't have any like remainder of that. And he says, I couldn't read when I would see signs in store windows, writing on crates. I couldn't understand them, but I remembered enough to know that they were more than scratches on a wall. And she asks what else he remembers, and he says, too much. I can still feel that darkness inside me. I keep thinking it will go, but I know, I said. It's better now, but it's still there. Like a shadow next to my heart. I didn't know what that might imply about the darkling's power, and I didn't want to consider it. Maybe it will fade in time. So, yeah, what might that imply about the darkling's power? I can't think that it's like, oh, it has more staying power than hers, because I am assuming the people who were able to like call light to their hands are still able to do that, unless it was meant to be a temporary thing. But I don't think so, right? Like, they probably still permanently can do that, I think. I'm assuming. Because otherwise, if it was only temporary, then her getting her power completely removed does not feel like a proportional event. But yeah, she tells him that he needs to give himself time to heal. And he's like, that would be really nice, but everybody is looking to me right now. And we are coming out of this like horrific war, and they need assurance. And I just can't sit back and be cool right now. I have to act. And we'll do our best to secure the borders and leave for Osalta tomorrow and have emissaries en route to try to bring the militias back under the king's flag. He gave a slight laugh. My flag. And she asks him at this point about, well, first she says that maybe the fact that people call him the King of Scars is a good thing, because at first he's worried that they know that he was like a Volcra for a minute. And she's like, no, but there are some probably rumors out there, and that might not be such a bad thing, because I know that you really like to be loved, but being a little bit feared is not bad. A dash of that is probably good. But yeah, this is when he mentions the apparat, and she asks if he pardoned him. And he says, I had to. I need his support. I don't know. Like, probably. It would be super cool if we could just poison him. Like, can't we kill him and get him out of the way because he's like the worst? But do it in such a way as so that it doesn't look like it was a political attack or assassination. He's very old, right? I'm sure that we could arrange something. The apparat, I just hate him so much. And the fact that he has managed to skate by, all of this, in my view, points to him turning up in King of Scars. And I just don't want to fucking see him anymore. I'm also realizing that part of my hatred of him is that the voice actress who does the audiobooks gives him this really, not only like creepy voice, but it's also annoying, and she talks really slow when she uses it. So whenever he's having like a monologue, I jump the speed up to like 1.3 because I cannot deal with how long it takes for her to get a full sentence out when she's using his voice. So I think that that's also part of why I hate the apparat so much. It's not his fault. And he asks her to stay at court, but she's very firmly like, dude, no, I'm not a sun summoner anymore. I don't want to be at court. Like, this isn't the life that I like. And he says, but you understand this thing. He tapped his chest. And I understood a great deal there why that appealed to him, her sticking around when she's the only person who really gets what he might be feeling. I don't know if Genya has it as well, because she did suffer this attack, so she hasn't mentioned it. And Genya sort of keeps herself to herself. She likes to joke and sort of keep people at arm's length. I'm not sure she'd ever admit that. So it's certainly not going to be the kind of connection that Nikolai would need. But yeah, I just appreciated that he admits a little bit, like, I'd like to keep you around because you're the only other person who gets what we went through. And she tries to give him back the emerald ring, and he tells her to keep it and build something new. So she decides that she is going to, as we find out later, build like an orphanage. And it was really sweet. I really liked that ending. But I am getting a little ahead of myself. First, we have the pardon that Genya gets. Then she gets a job offer to lead the Second Army with David and Zoya. And eventually, after sort of arguing with Alina for a while, she decides to take it. And then we have the burning of the two bodies, the one that is actually the Darkling and the one that was tailored to look like Alina. Some in the crowd were complaining that the Darkling had no business sharing a pyre with a saint. They were correct. But this felt right to me, and the people needed to see an end to it. I suppose that's true, but they are also correct. And she whispers his name, Alexander, at the end of the burning, because she's the only one who remembers it. And that is how that ends. And then we go into the epilogue. And I really like this. We have, first of all, her and Mal getting married in this very like small ceremony. And Onkat is part of their family now, along with Misha. And then they open up on the same spot as the orphanage where they had been in Karimzin, their own orphanage. And I just really liked this. I thought this was really sweet. You know, I am a big proponent of education, and I am not somebody who wants children, but when I have worked with kids, I have really found it rewarding. It's just that I don't want to raise them, And this was sort of, it was a different vibe because it was all boys in that one. But the end of Little Women, she opens a school. And I always found that to be a really satisfying ending because it feels like it's also a beginning for other people. And that's how this feels as well, is like they're attempting to pay it forward to children who are alone in the world and they know what that's like. They're also trying to repair the damage from this war that they all just went through and give these kids a family that they had lost. They are spoiling them to a point. It was a place for children. The piano in the music room was left uncovered. The larder door was never locked. A lantern was always lit in the dormitories to keep away the dark. The staff did not approve. The students were too boisterous. Too much money was wasted on sugar for tea, on coal in the winter, on books that contained nothing but fairy stories. And why did each child require a new pair of skates? Young, rich, possibly mad. These were the words whispered about the couple who ran the orphanage. But they paid well, and the boy was so charming it was hard to stay mad at him even when he refused to take the switch to some hellion who had tracked mud across the entryway floor. And yeah, this is something that for me has been more and more on my mind the older I get. I am not interested in having my own children, but there are so many kids out there that could do good in the world if they were just given like any sort of support. And Owen and I have talked about not wanting our own kids, but eventually perhaps deciding to foster. And I know that it's an incredibly difficult, demanding job. And it's the sort of thing that, I'm a big fan of a challenge, depending on the type of challenge. And Owen, having been brought up in the way that he was, he really appreciates the concept of being able to give a home to somebody who doesn't have one. So, yeah, this like touched my heart in particular, the way that this ended. I just really liked the idea of the two of them, instead of him knocking her up and them going on to have children, the two of them building a home together with other children that were like them and creating they're participating in a sort of cycle, but they're trying to improve that cycle and work within it. And they also have all these resources because of Nikolai, who comes and brings them all kinds of stuff and visits occasionally. And I don't know, I just really, really liked this. And, there's the talk of the Grisha coming to visit her. And the ending of this is, she saw sadness in the boy, too. Though the woods still welcomed him, he was separate from them now. The bond born in his bones burned away in the same moment that he'd given up his life for her. But then the hour would pass, and the teachers would catch them giggling in a dim hallway or kissing by the stairs. Besides, most days were too full for mourning. There were classes to teach, meals to prepare, letters to write. When evening fell, the boy would bring the girl a glass of tea, a slice of lemon cake, an apple blossom floating in a blue cup. He would kiss her neck and whisper new names in her ear. They had an ordinary life, full of ordinary things, if love can ever be called that. So I found the ending actually very satisfying, and I really didn't think I would. I was just so prepared to just be irritated and disappointed. And like I said, the whole thing with the Darkling aside, that did bug me. But it feels like he's not anywhere to be seen in the epilogue, and she has completely moved on from that. And there's no mention of her like thinking back on him or anything. I'm sure she does, but I really appreciated that ending. So yeah, I just wish that what preceded the ending had been more satisfying and faster paced and had a little bit more like overall development in it. So I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again to Denise for hanging out in the chat with me and giving me some information. Thank you to Joanna for commissioning the episode. And let me see when I start King of Scars. Tuesday, August 10th, so a little bit over a month away. All right. Well, stay tuned for that, y'all. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.